Yeah, just from living this on that and the drug thing, you know. Yeah, why doing trip to the news lately? I need to tune in. There's a lot going on with this world, man. Let's tune in, bro.
Centuries of systemic racism have created a wealth gap in America between black and white Americans. In her latest New York Times piece, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Nicole Hannah-Jones writes, if true justice and equality are ever to be achieved in the United States, the country must finally take seriously what it owes black Americans. MSNBC correspondent Tremaine Lee interviewed Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Man, what y'all think, man? They said no 40 acres in the mill, but we're worth 50 million for each black American. Close the rest that y'all think. I know a lot of people have opinions on that stuff. I don't know.
Jones in his latest Into America podcast on reparations. Tremaine joins me now. And Tremaine, what are the factors that Nicole talked about here that are contributing or have contributed to the racial wealth gap in our country?
Hey, Allison, more than just contributions, the actual source, the root of the wealth gap goes back to shortly after emancipation, when the entire, enslaved population, formerly enslaved population, really were pushed out with absolutely nothing, starting from ground zero. And even though the government had promised some restitution in 40 acres and a mule, those promises fell through. And in fact, the former, plantation owners were given back that land that had been promised to enslaved people. But then after that, decades and decades of Jim Crow laws, lack of access to jobs, depressed housing values, on and on, up from after emancipation through Reconstruction, redemption, into the
But you see, my last live stream, they was talking about raising prices up on all the food products. So you know what I'm saying? There's a lot going on, man. Y'all need to stay in tune with this, man. You know what I'm saying? Like these videos, you know what I'm saying? It, it'll help the video go into, you know what I'm saying, the revenue. But, you know what I'm saying? No, hit that like button. So there's more content to come. You feel me?
the 50s and 60s. All of these contributing factors, including the actual violent disposition.
But this real life, you know what I'm saying? This real life stuff right here. Like, you know,
Possession of wealth, the actual bombing of Black Wall Street, the actual burning and looting of Black communities all across the country, and that land and that wealth and resources were never returned.
So how do we begin to close the gap between black and white Americans, and what would closing that gap mean for black Americans, their future, their economic security?
Well, part of the issue has always been that Black folks haven't been able to accumulate the wealth and then pass it on, like buying a house and then passing it on to your children, or taking the equity out of that and passing it on. And so Nicole Hannah-Jones argues that there is only one solution, and that's restitution or reparations. Let's take a listen to what she has to say.
Justices breed present suffering.
I think the racial wealth gap speaks to the fact that we still have a long way to go to achieve ideals of equality in this country.
The racial wealth gap is a measure of the white family and the African-American family that's right smack dab in the middle, the median.
Imagine this: waking up tomorrow morning and seeing $151 million credited to your bank account. Life-changing.
everything I'm paying off everything I owe. You know what I'm saying? Going to get family a nice crib. You know what I'm saying? Get my kids, you know what I'm saying? A lot of clothes, food, you know, some learning stuff, some games, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? And then time around, I'm going for some land.
Isn't it? But what if I told you this isn't just a pipe dream? What if I told you this is what's being discussed as a way to finally address the racial wealth gap and provide
I ain't gonna lie. I wanna go, you know, gonna help the homeless out too. You hear me? Feed the homeless, you know, build something for the kids, you know.
reparations to Black Americans. For centuries, Black Americans have been denied opportunities to build generational wealth, forced to endure economic exclusion, systemic racism, and outright theft of their labor. And now, for the first time in history, a plan is on the table to close that gap with reparations payments, massive ones.
All praise due to Allah, you know what I'm saying?
But here's the kicker. By the end of this video, you'll know why Black Americans shouldn't just receive reparations. You'll understand why they shouldn't be paying taxes at all. That's right, zero taxes. Because the truth is, the wealth owed to Black Americans in reparations far exceeds anything they've contributed to the system. Welcome to the Chronicles of Blacks, a channel where we delve into the deep tapestry of Black history. Please subscribe to our channel as we continue to fight for our rights as Blacks.
This is what it's their channel right here, you know. Y'all wanna go tune into their channel, baby. They got some good content.
Let's break it down. The average Black household contributes around $3,000 in federal taxes every year. Multiply that by decades of systemic oppression, redlining, and underpaid labor, and you're looking at billions, asterisk billions asterisk, funneled into a system that has historically excluded Black Americans from its benefits. But wait, it gets deeper. Did you know that during the Jim Crow era, taxes were used as a weapon against Black Americans? Poll taxes were designed to prevent Black people from voting. Property taxes were unfairly assessed to strip land and resources from Black families. Even today, Black Americans face disproportionate taxation on their earnings while receiving fewer benefits in return. And yet, the U.S. government has had no problem using Black labor, Black innovation, and Black...
You know what I'm saying? That ain't right, man. That ain't right. Black, Mexican, Latino, that ain't right, man. African, that ain't right.
Black resilience to build its wealth. Consider this. During slavery alone, the unpaid labor of Black Americans generated an estimated $10 trillion in today's dollars. That's $10 trillion stolen, without compensation.
$10 trillion. Do y'all know how much that is? $10 trillion? $10 trillion. $10 trillion. $10 trillion.
Now, imagine the ripple effect of $151 million in reparations for each Black American. Families could erase generational debt, invest...
Each? That's a whole lot. You know what I'm saying? That's a whole lot. You hear me?
in businesses, purchase homes, and create wealth that lasts for centuries. But that's not all. Reparations would also address the systemic theft of opportunities. Let's not forget the land stolen from Black farmers during the 20th century, estimated to be worth over $200 billion today.
They stole, with you that, they stole a whole lot of land. They said it's worth over $2 billion today. You know what I'm saying? We needs that. We needs that. You hear me? We needs that.
Or the wealth stripped away during the era of redlining, when Black families were denied homeownership
can't fake this.
He think he doing
and the chance
time.
to build equity. And here's the wild part. Even without reparations, Black Americans have contributed billions to the U.S. economy in taxes, despite being locked out of opportunities. So when we talk about reparations, we're not just talking about payments. We're talking about leveling the playing field and correcting centuries of injustice. Stay with me, because we're about to dive into how reparations could make taxes obsolete for Black Americans.
I ain't gonna even playing field. You know what I'm saying? Like, y'all owe us $10 trillion, and then $2 billion, roughly over $2 billion in farmland.
And the numbers will blow your mind. This isn't just about what's owed, it's about what's fair. If you've ever wondered why the racial wealth gap exists, or how it could finally be closed, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now that we've set the stage, let's talk about the real numbers behind this historic push for reparations. $151 million for every Black American. It sounds staggering, right?
Yeah, you really just said, right? 150 million for each Black person. That's, you know what I'm saying? Not only Black, you know what I'm saying? But let's just finish listening to what you're saying.
Stay with me, because we're about to dive into how reparations could make taxes obsolete for Black Americans. And the numbers will blow your mind. This isn't just about what's owed, it's about what's fair. If you've ever wondered why the racial wealth gap exists, or how it could finally be closed, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now that we've set the stage, let's talk about the real numbers behind this historic push for reparations. $151 million for every Black American. It sounds staggering, right? But when you break it down, it's not just justified, it's overdue. Hello dear viewers, we noticed from our analytics that we are having an international community of viewers. Please tell us where you are watching from in the comments section below. Let's start with taxes. Black Americans have been paying taxes into a system that has consistently worked against them. Over the past century alone, trillions of dollars have been extracted from Black households in federal, state, and local taxes. But what has that money built? Roads and schools that Black families were often denied access to. Public services that actively excluded them. Policing and judicial systems that disproportionately targeted them. Here's an example. During the Jim Crow era, Black Americans paid property taxes just like everyone else, but their schools were underfunded, their neighborhoods neglected, and their opportunities for upward mobility deliberately suppressed. Those same taxes funded schools for white children, leaving Black communities with crumbling infrastructure and little chance to succeed. And it didn't stop there. Redlining policies and discriminatory lending practices prevented Black families from buying homes in neighborhoods with higher property values. That meant less equity, less wealth, and less access to better funded public services. All
That's a lot, man. That's a lot. Probably more than that, but
redlining policies and discriminatory lending practices prevented Black families from buying homes in neighborhoods with higher property values. That meant less equity, less wealth, and less access to better funded public services, all while paying taxes into a system that ignored them. Now think about this. If the average Black household pays $3,000 annually in federal taxes, that's $90,000 over 30 years. Multiply that by tens of millions of Black Americans, and you're looking at billions in contributions to a system that has systematically excluded them. Reparations wouldn't just repay that debt. They would acknowledge the countless ways Black Americans have been overtaxed and underrepresented. But what if those taxes never had to be paid in the first place? What if Black Americans could opt out of funding systems that have worked against them for centuries?
like you just said, they're working against us for centuries. You know what I'm saying? Like we've been paying taxes for which we shouldn't have to be paying taxes. And not only paying taxes, they overtaxing us. You know what I'm saying? That's basically what they're saying. You know what I'm saying? And so why they're overtaxing us as fraction and crash are it I'm trying to find a way and say that it's just like the education system and the living wage system, you know what I'm saying? But yeah.
And contributions to a system that has systematically excluded them. Reparations wouldn't just repay that debt. They would acknowledge the countless ways Black Americans have been overtaxed and underrepresented. But what if those taxes never had to be paid in the first place? What if Black Americans could opt out of funding systems that have worked against them for centuries? That's exactly what reparations could accomplish. With $151 million per person, there would be no need to rely on public assistance programs or underfunded schools. Black families could fund their own future.
You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? That's why we gotta go to they system and they, you know what I'm saying? Because we ain't got enough funding to fund our own system. You know? Yeah. Yeah. Different. I can see that because how different people got different beliefs. You know what I'm saying? But say, I ain't gonna get into all that. We just gonna finish watching this, you know what I mean?
Futures, free from the burden of taxes that don't serve them. And let's not forget the cost of systemic racism. During slavery, Black labor was the engine of the U.S. economy. Enslaved people built the wealth of Southern plantation owners, Northern.
And this ain't no promoting, you know what I'm saying? This just, you know what I'm saying? This just research, you know what I'm saying? Lying people on what's going on, man, you know what I'm saying? What's going on now, like what they trying to get understood and what we're trying to get established, what's, you know what I'm saying? How the future gonna be, you know what I'm saying? Which nobody know how the future gonna be, but if you could do right, why not do right? You did.
Industrialists, and the entire nation. That wealth, estimated at over $10 trillion in today's dollars, was stolen without compensation. Even after emancipation, sharecropping and exploitative labor practices continued to drain wealth from Black families. Fast forward to today, and the racial wealth gap remains stark. The median wealth of a white family is nearly 10 times that of a Black family. Without reparations, it would take over 200 years for Black Americans to achieve economic parity. But with reparations, that gap could be closed almost overnight. Here's where the numbers get even more interesting. If $151 million were distributed to every Black American, the total cost would be about $6 trillion. That's a lot of money, until you consider the U.S. federal budget.
Oh. He said that they buy orders $10 trillion. And he just said, excuse me, yeah. He just said they get easily one person 151 million and up to $6 trillion. You know what I'm saying?
Even after emancipation, sharecropping and exploitative labor practices continued to drain wealth from Black families. Fast forward to today, and the racial wealth gap remains stark. The median wealth of a white family is nearly 10 times that of a Black family. Without reparations, it would take over 200 years for Black Americans to achieve economic parity. But with reparations, that gap could be closed almost overnight. Here's where the numbers get even more interesting. If $151 million were distributed to every Black American, the total cost would be about $6 trillion. That's a lot of money, until you consider the U.S. federal budget. In 2023 alone, the government spent over $6 trillion. If we can afford trillion-dollar wars and massive...
You gotta hear that. You gotta hear that. Alone. Just in 1 year, 2023, they spent $6 trillion. It don't add up. It don't add up.
to achieve economic parity. But with reparations, that gap could be closed almost overnight. Here's where the numbers get even more interesting. If $151 million were distributed to every Black American, the total cost would be about $6 trillion. That's a lot of money, until you consider the U.S. federal budget. In 2023 alone, the government spent over $6 trillion.
No, no. No, no.
If we can afford trillion-dollar wars and massive corporate bailouts, why can't we afford justice for Black Americans? Reparations wouldn't just benefit Black communities, they would benefit the entire economy. Studies
You hear that, right? It won't just benefit. And benefit the whole entire men. Huh. Mm.
have shown that closing the racial wealth gap would add trillions of dollars to the U.S. GDP. Black Americans would invest in businesses, create jobs, and stimulate economic growth on an unprecedented scale. First, we need to address the massive role systemic racism has played in draining wealth from Black communities. Take the Homestead Act of 1862, which granted 160 acres of free land to American citizens, creating millions of white landowners. Meanwhile, newly freed Black Americans were systematically excluded. Over 270 million acres of land were distributed, land worth billions today, but Black families were denied this opportunity to build generational wealth.
As an online creative, you might stop and look at the trees, but these trees can't help your audience find your brand. Linktree can.
Why?
Address the massive role systemic racism has played in draining wealth from Black communities. Take the Homestead Act of 1862, which granted 160 acres of free land to American citizens, creating millions of white landowners. Meanwhile, newly freed Black Americans were systematically excluded. Over 270 million acres of land were distributed, land worth billions today, but Black families were denied this opportunity to build generational wealth.
Why?
Now, let's look at the economic losses due to Jim Crow laws. Between 1877 and the mid-1960s, Jim Crow policies stripped Black Americans of countless economic opportunities. Black farmers, for example, owned over 15 million acres of farmland in 1910, but by 1997, that number had dropped to just 2.3 million acres. Why? Discriminatory policies, predatory practices, and outright land theft drove Black families off their land. The value of that lost land alone is estimated at over $200 billion. And it didn't stop there. From 1934 to 1968, the federal government supported redlining through the Home Owners Loan Corporation. This practice systematically denied Black families access to home loans in undesirable areas, areas often determined solely by race. As a result, Black families were locked out of one of the most powerful tools for building wealth, homeownership. The wealth lost to redlining is estimated at $213 billion. Add to this the economic impact of mass incarceration. Since the 1970s, the war on drugs and other discriminatory policies have disproportionately targeted Black Americans, stripping families of breadwinners and leaving communities economically devastated. Today, Black Americans are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of white Americans, and the financial impact is staggering. Families lose income, face legal costs, and struggle to rebuild once their loved ones return. Now, let's talk taxes. Over the last century, Black Americans have paid trillions in taxes, funding public services and systems that have actively worked against them. For example, Black communities have historically been over-policed while receiving fewer public services. Schools in predominantly black neighborhoods receive less funding, roads and infrastructure are neglected, and health disparities remain unaddressed. So why should black Americans continue to pay into a system that has failed them? Let's break it down further. The median income for a black household in 2022 was approximately $45,000. With an average tax rate of 20%, that's $9,000 in federal taxes annually. Over a lifetime, that's nearly $500,000 per household paid into a system that owes them far more in reparations. And let's talk about fairness. Other groups have received reparations for historical injustices. Japanese Americans, in turn, during World War II, were compensated. Indigenous tribes have received land and financial settlements. Why should black Americans be any different? By the end of this discussion, it'll be clear, reparations aren't just a moral obligation, they're an economic necessity. And if black Americans receive what they're owed, paying taxes into a system that has failed them becomes a thing of the past. The numbers don't lie, and the time for action is now. Let's take a moment to dive deeper.
Time for action is now. Maybe y'all gotta do, you gotta get out and do the work. Come eat.
Into the numbers and history that prove why reparations are not only justified but essential, and why taxes should no longer apply to black Americans. But here's the game changer. $151 million in reparations per person would erase the need for reliance on federal programs or paying into a system designed to perpetuate inequality.
Oh, bro. I think they'll start with a full run around these two, but it feels like what is on, that's not really, that's not a, I think that's the
Imagine the possibilities. Families could invest in education, start businesses, purchase homes.
This is why I stopped shopping on Amazon.
That's why I said, I think it was talking online about what he just said.
Federal programs or paying into a system designed to perpetuate inequality. Imagine the possibilities. Families could invest in education, start businesses, purchase homes, and build generational wealth, all without the burden of funding a system that has historically excluded them. Hello dear viewers, we noticed from our analytics that we are having an international community of viewers. Please tell us where you are watching from in the comments section below. And let's not forget the precedent. The US government has already provided reparations in other cases. Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II received $20,000 each in compensation. International community of viewers, please tell us where you are watching from in the comments section below. And let's not forget the precedent. The US government has already provided reparations in other cases. Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II received $20,000 each in compensation. Indigenous tribes have received billions in financial settlements and land restitution. If these reparations were possible, why not for black Americans? Some critics argue that reparations would be too expensive. But consider this, the US spent $13 trillion on wars in the Middle East over the past 2 decades. That's more than twice the estimated cost of reparations.
He just broke it down for you. Listen to what he just said now. Pay attention to what he just said.
The US government has already provided reparations in other cases. Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II received $20,000 each in compensation. Indigenous tribes have received billions in financial settlements and land restitution. If these reparations were possible, why not for black Americans? Some critics argue that reparations would be too expensive. But consider this, the US spent $13 trillion on wars in the Middle East over the past 2 decades.
13 trillion. We passed 2 decades. But then turn around and said it, but we spent 6 trillion within 1 year.
That's more than twice the estimated cost of reparations for Black Americans. If we can afford war, we can afford justice. And here's the best part: reparations would benefit everyone. Closing the racial wealth gap would inject trillions of dollars into the U.S. economy, creating jobs, boosting consumer spending, and reducing reliance on public assistance programs. Everyone wins when justice is served. So let's ask the real question. If Black Americans are owed trillions in reparations, why should they continue paying taxes into a system that owes them? The answer is simple: they shouldn't. Reparations aren't just about money. They're about fairness, equity, and acknowledging the debt that America has owed to Black communities for centuries. Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll explore exactly how reparations could transform Black communities and why this isn't just about payments. It's about rewriting history and reclaiming what's rightfully theirs. Now let's shift focus to the transformative power of reparations. Imagine a world where Black Americans finally receive the financial justice they've been denied for centuries. What would $151 million per person mean for individuals, families, and entire communities? The answer is simple: it would change everything. First, let's talk about homeownership. Housing has long been one of the most significant tools for building wealth, yet Black Americans have been systematically excluded from it. Redlining, discriminatory lending practices, and unequal access.
Right. So you pay attention to soul food. You know what I'm saying? They grandma had that house, you know what I'm saying? Everybody used to come to that house to eat. And when she passed, she left the kids the house. You know what I'm saying? It's in my wealth, you feel me? Some people have land. You know what I'm saying?
To housing programs created a legacy of disparity. In 2022, the Black home ownership rate was just 44%, compared to 74% for white Americans. Reparations could close this gap instantly, enabling millions of Black families to buy homes, build equity, and pass down wealth to future generations. But it's not just about buying homes. Reparations would allow Black communities to rebuild themselves from the ground up. Schools in predominantly Black neighborhoods could finally receive the funding they need. Imagine classrooms equipped with the latest technology. Teachers paid what they deserve, and students given every opportunity to succeed. Education is a powerful equalizer, and reparations would ensure Black children have access to the best. And what about businesses? Historically, Black entrepreneurs have faced significant barriers to starting and growing businesses, from lack of access to capital to outright discrimination. Reparations would provide the financial freedom to invest in Black-owned businesses, creating jobs and opportunities within the community. More Black-owned businesses mean more wealth circulating locally, strengthening neighborhoods and building self-sufficiency. Now, let's dive into health disparities. Black Americans face higher rates of chronic illnesses like diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease. They are also less likely to have access to quality health care. Reparations could change that by allowing families to afford the best medical care and invest in preventive health measures. Imagine community health centers offering free or low-cost care, funded entirely by reparations payments. The result? Healthier communities and longer lives. Then there's student loan debt, a burden disproportionately carried by Black Americans. On average, Black college graduates owe $25,000 more in student loans than their white counterparts. Reparations would eliminate this debt instantly, freeing Black graduates to pursue careers, start families, and invest in their futures without the weight of loans holding them back. Let's not forget about the impact on systemic poverty. Currently, 19.5% of Black Americans live below the poverty line, compared to 8.1% of white Americans. Reparations would eradicate poverty in Black communities overnight, providing a financial cushion that ensures no family has to choose between paying rent and putting food on the table. And while we're talking numbers, let's consider the ripple effect. When Black Americans have access to wealth, they don't just benefit themselves, they benefit the entire economy. Studies show that closing the racial wealth gap could add $1.5 trillion to the U.S. GDP by 2028. That's more money for everyone, more jobs created, and more opportunities across the board. But reparations aren't just about the money. They're about justice. They're about acknowledging the systemic wrongs that have been committed and making things right. They're about recognizing the unpaid labor of enslaved people, the stolen wealth of black farmers, and the generations of discrimination that have held black Americans back. Reparations are about rewriting the narrative and creating a future where everyone has an equal shot at success. Critics often ask, where will the money come from? The answer lies in the same places the government has always found money: reallocating budgets, taxing billionaires, and prioritizing justice over war and corporate bailouts. It's not a question of whether we can afford reparations. It's a question of whether we're willing to do what's right. Let's also address another argument. Why should people today pay for the sins of the past? The reality is that the wealth gap, systemic racism, and ongoing discrimination are not relics of history. They're ongoing issues that continue to harm black Americans. Reparations aren't about guilt. They're about responsibility. They're about acknowledging that the systems built on slavery and segregation still exist and taking steps to dismantle them. Imagine the United States as
You see, so it still exists. Still exists.
from. The answer lies in the same places the government has always found money: reallocating budgets, taxing billionaires, and prioritizing justice over war and corporate bailouts. It's not a question of whether we can afford reparations. It's a question of whether we're willing to do what's right. Let's also address another argument. Why should people today pay for the sins of the past? The reality is that the wealth gap, systemic racism, and ongoing discrimination are not relics of history. They're ongoing issues that continue to harm black Americans. Reparations aren't about guilt. They're about responsibility. They're about acknowledging that the systems built on slavery and segregation still exist and taking steps to dismantle them. Imagine the United States as a house built on a cracked foundation. The cracks represent slavery, Jim Crow laws, redlining, and systemic racism. You can paint the walls, add furniture, and make it look beautiful, but the cracks remain. Reparations are the process of fixing that foundation so that everyone can live in a house that's truly stable and fair. By the end of this video, one thing should be clear: reparations aren't just a financial transaction. They're a moral obligation. They're a way to ensure that the mistakes of the past don't continue to define the future. And for black Americans, they represent the opportunity to finally build the lives they've always deserved. So what happens next? That's up to all of us. Reparations may seem like a distant dream, but with enough collective effort, they can become a reality. It starts with education.
Talk about it become reality. That's what reality right now. That's what we, you know what I'm saying? Where the ones that are actually working towards
Education, advocacy, and the courage to demand change.
Yo, put the camera down! Do you even have anywhere for your audience to go after they watch the video you spent hours on?
Because when justice is served, everyone benefits. And when they're a way to ensure that the mistakes of the past don't continue to define the future. And for black Americans, they represent the opportunity to finally build the lives they've always deserved. So what happens next? That's up to all of us. Reparations may seem like a distant dream, but with enough collective effort, they can become a reality. It starts with education, advocacy, and the courage to demand change. Because when justice is served, everyone benefits. And when reparations are paid, black Americans can finally step into a future free from the chains of the past. Let's now focus on the practical implementation of reparations and the long-term impact it would have on not just black Americans, but the entire nation. How can we turn this bold vision into reality? And what steps need to be taken to ensure that reparations create lasting change? First, let's talk logistics. A common misconception about reparations is that it would involve simply cutting checks. While direct financial payments are a crucial part, reparations must also include systemic changes. This means creating programs and policies that address the root causes of inequality. For example, establishing federal grants for Black-owned businesses, funding historically Black colleges and universities, and investing in healthcare and housing initiatives specifically for Black communities. A reparations program of this magnitude would require a national commission to oversee its implementation. This commission would determine eligibility, distribution methods, and accountability measures to ensure that the funds are used effectively. For instance, eligibility could be based on lineage, requiring proof of descent from enslaved individuals or those affected by Jim Crow laws. But here's where things get even more impactful. Reparations could be distributed in ways that build generational wealth. For example, offering tax-free savings accounts, business startup grants, or land ownership opportunities. These tools would ensure that the benefits of reparations extend far beyond a single generation, creating a ripple effect that uplifts entire communities. Now, let's address a critical question. How will this be funded? One option is reallocating existing federal budgets. The U.S. spends over $800 billion annually on defense alone. Redirecting even a fraction of this amount toward reparations would cover the cost while still maintaining national security. Additionally, a wealth tax on the richest Americans, those who have benefited the most from centuries of systemic inequality, could generate billions in revenue. Another option is leveraging the trillions of dollars that corporations hold in profits. Many of these companies have directly or indirectly benefited from slavery and systemic racism. By requiring them to contribute to a reparations fund, we can hold them accountable while addressing historical injustices. Now let's explore how reparations would reshape the economic landscape. When Black Americans receive the resources they deserve, the entire economy benefits. Consider this. The racial wealth gap costs the U.S. economy an estimated $1.5 trillion every year. Closing that gap through reparations would unleash untapped economic potential. More disposable income means more spending, which drives business growth and job creation. Reparations would also reduce reliance on social welfare programs. With financial stability, families wouldn't need as much assistance for housing, healthcare, or food security.
Just to control.
This would save the government billions in public spending, creating a more balanced and efficient economy. But beyond the numbers, reparations would bring something priceless: healing. For centuries, the United States has ignored the deep wounds caused by slavery and systemic racism. Reparations would be a tangible acknowledgement of these injustices and a commitment to making things right. This act of accountability would foster unity and trust, paving the way for a stronger, more equitable nation. Let's not underestimate the cultural impact either. Reparations would empower Black Americans to tell their own stories and preserve their history. From funding museums and cultural centers to supporting Black artists and writers, reparations would amplify voices that have long been silenced. It's about reclaiming narratives and celebrating the contributions of Black Americans to this country. Now, imagine a future where the legacy of slavery and discrimination no longer defines Black communities. Imagine neighborhoods thriving with new businesses, children attending well-funded schools, and families passing down wealth instead of debt. This is the future reparations can create, a future where equality is more than just an ideal, it's a reality. Critics may argue that reparations are divisive or that they'll lead to resentment. But the truth is, ignoring the problem has done far more harm. Reparations are not about division, they're about accountability. They're about building a country where everyone, regardless of race, has an equal opportunity to succeed. And let's be clear, reparations are not unprecedented. The U.S. has compensated other groups in the past, from Japanese Americans interned during World War II to Native American tribes whose lands were stolen. These efforts, while not perfect, demonstrate that reparations are possible when there's the will to make them happen. So where do we go from here? It starts with education. The more people understand the historical and economic basis for reparations, the harder it becomes to deny their necessity. From there, it's about advocacy, demanding that policymakers prioritize reparations and hold corporations accountable. It's also about coalition building. Reparations aren't just a Black issue.
Listen to this.
Starts with education. The more people understand the historical and economic basis for reparations, the harder it becomes to deny their necessity. From there, it's about advocacy, demanding that policymakers prioritize reparations and hold corporations accountable. It's also about coalition building. Reparations aren't just a black issue, they're an American issue. When we address systemic inequality, everyone benefits. By bringing together diverse communities and allies, we can create a united front that pushes for meaningful change. And finally, it's about persistence. The road to reparations will not be easy. There will be resistance, misinformation, and setbacks. But history has shown us that change is possible when people come together and refuse to give up. In the end, reparations are about more than just money. They're about justice, equity, and the promise of a brighter future. They're about ensuring that Black Americans finally receive what they're owed and that the sins of the past no longer dictate the future. So the question isn't whether we can afford reparations, it's whether we can afford not to. Because the cost of inaction is far greater than the price of justice. And when reparations are paid, it won't just be a win for Black Americans, it will be a win for all of us. Let's wrap this up by diving into one of the most pressing questions. What would America look like after reparations? Imagine a country where the racial wealth gap is finally closed, where justice has been served, and where systemic inequality is no longer the norm. What would change, and how would it benefit every American? To start, let's envision the immediate effects. Once reparations are distributed, Black Americans would have the financial resources to invest in their futures. Imagine families finally being able to buy homes without fear of discrimination or redlining. Homeownership is one of the most significant drivers of wealth in this country, and reparations could make that dream accessible to millions. Beyond homeownership, imagine Black entrepreneurs flooding the market with innovative businesses. Today, only about 2% of small business owners in the U.S. are Black, largely due to a lack of access to capital. Reparations could change that overnight. With financial resources to launch businesses, the economic ripple effect would be monumental.
Alright, if y'all want to finish watching this, y'all can go to this page, you know what I'm saying? But that's it for this video. Else I get something to do. Like, comment, subscribe.